are in attendance. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
A motion by Mr. Parker, second by Mr. Deaver. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, be none. Agenda is adopted. Are there any community announcements?
I
Yes, ma'am.
have a couple. Our Plane Crazy this month was really neat. Dan Craig gave a very interesting presentation about designing and building Spaceship One with Depredate. And Dano had just celebrated his 30th anniversary of working at Scale Composites. And there were several really great quotes that I didn't write down, but fortunately Bill Deaver got them. But Dan's been working on a flying car ever since he went to work at Scale. Now, he hasn't built it yet, but it's been in his mind, and Bert always would ask him, why do you want to do this? And he finally said it was because of the challenge, the design challenge that was there. Because he says, I never had a good answer. I don't know why I wanted to do this. But I thought that was really neat. Everybody enjoyed him, except not everybody could hear him. And I didn't think about giving him this microphone. Or maybe I'll get one of those things they can hang around their neck. But he's one of these young guys that talks kind of rapid fire, but he's kind of low with his talking. And he's not a big public speaker, but he's got lots of information to talk about. And speaking of Scale, I want you to know, 36 years ago, they broke ground here at the airport. 36 years ago, yesterday, Scale Composites broke ground. And there's a picture in the hallway where you have the digitized scrapbook, and I don't know what page it's on, but there's a picture showing Bert Rattan and then his vice president, I think it was Iverson.
Herb Iverson.
Yeah, Herb. And Dan Sabovich with a shovel breaking ground, and then this was their proposed building, and it's the building that still stands there today. I thought that was kind of neat. And it's because of that scrapbook, thank you Jason, thank you Karina for digitizing that scrapbook. All that history from 1972, from when the district was formed, to the year 2000, is all there in newspaper clippings. It's really neat. And I found something in a photo album that Jerry gave me, and it's a picture of a truck, an old GMC truck. And it says Northrop on the side, not Northrop Grumman, because this is before then. So it's sometime in the early 70s. And it's got this ramp built on it. And then I don't know whether they were doing wind tunnel testing, but then I found in the scrapbook, it was a drone that they fired, and they were testing here at Mojave. So when I was on the board, I thought it was funny that the FAA says, well, you know, we can't have any UAVs flying, and I'm thinking, they did that 50 years ago.
They did it in the 50s.
The Navy did it,
The
too.
Regulus.
Yes, yes.
Regular. I was a dispatcher at the sheriff's office, and we had to shut the traffic down in 4 safety states.
Exactly, exactly. So, yeah, that sort of thing has been going on here for decades. But anyway, Plane Crazy Saturday will be September 15th. And the speakers that I was going to have some conflicts, so I'm going to scramble around and get somebody. I'll let you know at the next board meeting. Thank you.
Kathy,
Thank you.
Yes.
how long have you been doing concrete?
Since 2009, and next year will be our 10th year. Yeah.
We had our first visitor from Andorra this time,
Yes.
in addition to Germany and every place else.
Yes. Yes.
If you know where Andorra is, if you don't, you know Flash Covered.
That's right. That's what you told them.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Are
you.
there any other community announcements? Being none, we move to the consent agenda. Is there a motion on the table for that?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Valentine,
Second.
second by Mr. Deaver.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank
Being
you.
none, if there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being none, motion passes unanimously. Action item 4A, staff report.
Good afternoon. We have actually a number of action items to discuss today with the board. Not a lot of new information, we're just starting to slowly bring some of this to the board for hopefully approval. First one being a lease agreement scale composites for building 17, which is this one, which is in Scales campus. We had multiple users in that building, they've all vacated. We were using part of that for storage, we've since vacated the building and offered the entire building to Scale. So they'd like to, the board to consider a lease agreement, 5-year lease with 1 5-year option. I'd like to recommend this for approval.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Valentine, second by Mr. Allred. Are there any questions of staff on this? Is there any public comment? All right. All in favor then say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being none, motion passed unanimously. Item 4B, please.
One of the items that we had on the budget this year under capital items was a vehicle for maintenance. So this would be a truck deployed. So we opted to upgrade this a bit, so we would have a truck here that would have a little bit more capability to do things like crack sealing, for instance, so we don't have to rent trucks next summer for the crack sealing. So we found this particular truck at Keep & Sons, and I'd like to have the board consider purchasing this vehicle. We actually had in the budget for $33,000, so this came in a little bit less than what we were anticipating.
Any questions of staff? Any public comment?
A little less than expected is always a good thing.
Is there anything special about it, special bet on, just a regular pickup?
John, do you know? With this
No, ma'am.
particular truck?
I do not.
I believe it's just a regular F-250.
250.
Okay.
It's a super cab.
We have a motion to approve by Mr. Deaver. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Allred. No further discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Being none, motion passes. Item 4C, please.
Okay, so here's where we get into the FAA grant. So let me give you a little bit of background. What we applied for, if you recall, this has been an ongoing pending project since 2012, when we had it pre-engineered originally. So this is to finish taxiway Bravo extension. The intent was to bring it all the way down here, parallel the end of the event center, have a turnaround, and come back here. So when we originally started talking with the FAA about it this year, when they actually wanted to consider the project, they requested that we submit the application in 3 different phases: a base bid to 600 feet, alternative 1, and alternative 2, which would have been the entire 1,300 feet. Did I say 6,600 feet is the base bid. So what we ended up getting awarded here is just the base bid, the 600 feet extension, which is still very good news. It's still room for an additional hangar to be built there at the end of Bravo. So what we're requesting the board to do today, there's 3 different items here. The first one is simply accepting the grant, the FAA grant, and this is something the board has to take action on. So the recommended action, district authorized CEO to execute the agreement accepting the FAA grant in the amount of $1,364,086.
Thank you very much.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I don't turn down.
Is there any public comment on this item? Any further questions of staff? We have a motion approved by Mr. Valentine, second by Mr. Deaver. If there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being none, motion passed unanimously. We move to 4D.
And the follow-on to this is we want to be able to apply for matching funds through the state of California. In order to submit an application, they actually need a resolution adopted by the board. So we can apply for up to 5% of the FAA award. But what's typical, what we typically get from Caltrans is a minimum of $25,000. So we'll get anywhere, we believe we'll get anywhere between $25,000 and $68,000 for this project, which means that we're on the hook for the remaining balance.
We just need to formally request it in this
Correct.
resolution.
Yes.
All right, any further questions of staff? Is there any public comment? Chair will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Motion by Mr. Deaver, second by Mr. Parker, was it? Mr. Valentine. If there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being none, motion passes unanimously. 4E, please.
Then the third piece of this particular project is awarding the bid. So we've had, when we completed the bid opening, which was in May, right, Dave? We actually had 5 bidders for this project. We had to, because we weren't quite sure at that time what the FAA was going to award, if they were going to award the full project or if they were going to award just the base bid or base plus all one. So we had to specify to the contractors what the award was going to be based on. And we had to base it on the total project value, because we just didn't know at the time. There could have been 3 different options. We couldn't necessarily say that it's based on any one of 3 options. We just had to say it's based on one of those factors. So we based it on the value of the total contract. And the low bidder for the total contract for the construction piece was actually Griffith, but there's a requirement the FAA has that they have to make up to 10% or 10% I think is the minimum to subcontract out to a disadvantaged small business. It's a federal requirement. Griffith did not meet that requirement. Granite was the next lowest bidder, and they do meet that requirement. So what our request is today is to award the construction piece of the bid to Granite for the base bid amount. The other 2 contractors in here were for lighting and painting. We had 3 bids come back for lighting. Randy Bell's Development was the low bidder on that. He's done a number of projects out here. Aviation Striping was the only bidder that we received, or only bid we received on the painting.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Any public comment?
Has the aviation striping company, did they do our other stuff?
They've done a lot of work out here. They didn't do the last project, but they were the only bidder for this particular project.
And wait, who did the spreadsheet?
Yeah, a lot of detail.
This bean counter liked that.
Move to approve.
Motion by Mr. Deaver to approve.
Second.
Second by Mr. Parker.
So the approval is awarding the contract to Granite and then aviation.
The approval is the recommended action.
Okay.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Being none, motion passes unanimously. We now get to move to item 4F, which will be my favorite one.
Yes. And John's on hand to answer some of these questions.
Do we still have the Raven Wranglers?
Yes, we do.
Oh.
We still have our depredation permit through the county, so we have someone come by bi-weekly or so to look for ravens to see if they're nesting in any hangars. This is sort of a more professional option, if you will. It's a requirement for 139 airports. It's not a requirement for general aviation airports. But John and I have been talking about this for about a year now to see if this is something we want to try to get accomplished for the airport, for the security of the airport and pilots in general. We've had a couple of bird strikes in the past. We've done what we can to mitigate some of these things. We removed some of the oleanders that were near the tower where we had some birds nesting. We relocated those oleanders over to the Bellshaw Park area, over by the ball field. We also had a dip pond on the south side of Stratolaunch over here. And we got rid of that water. We actually spent some time down there removing some sparrows. I think we got 200 sparrows in the span of a couple of hours. So we removed the hazards.
Are we allowed to say that?
Did you get them?
We won't comment any further.
Relocated 200 sparrows. So we've done what we can physically to discourage birds from nesting at the airport. What this wildlife hazard assessment and management plan accomplishes for us, it would meet the same requirements that a 139 commercial airport would have in terms of going through the assessment process and then coming up with a plan. The reason this came up recently is because some of our commercial space operators, when they file applications for their environmental assessment, this is a piece of their application that they have to submit. Basically, the FAA requests information on where their site operator that they intend to operate from, what their plans are for wildlife assessment and mitigation. So we wanted to at least get the information. We've found 3 potential resources to do the actual assessment and plan for us, and this is what we're presenting today. It's something we want to consider. We kind of beefed up the outside services piece of the budget, so I do consider this budgeted dollars for this year. It just may mean that when we get closer toward the end of the year, we might have to scale back on some additional projects that we may be wanting to implement. But it is something that I'd like the board to consider, and definitely open for discussion if you want on that.
Any questions of staff?
Did any of the people that need this for the applications, did they request that we have it?
They asked for it, and the FAA came back and asked for it also. So we, at that time, we basically had to challenge them, saying it's not a requirement for us. But that's what it really inspired John and I to sit down and evaluate whether we wanted to get this done anyway, even if it's not a requirement.
What did they say when you told them it wasn't a requirement for us? What did they accept?
They accepted that. They moved forward with, at the time this was Stratolaunch's environmental assessment, and they've moved forward with that since.
Without us doing anything.
Correct. Once they realized that it wasn't a requirement for us, they moved forward.
And this is just a report.
Do you want to describe it a little bit?
Good afternoon. So, no, it's not just a report, or depending on your use of the term report. So the assessment involves 12 months of study where a biologist, a FAA certified biologist comes out, does a survey once a month, both in the daytime and the nighttime, to determine what hazards exist within and around your airport. And in our case, it would be on the airport itself, but it would also encompass outlying areas such as they take into consideration the wastewater treatment facility just down the road as well, and they take a look at that. What typically happens with the FAA, especially when they ask for a hazard assessment, it's a hazard assessment leading to a wildlife management plan. And typically happens is the FAA comes back and says, thank you for your assessment, now put forth a plan as far as how you're going to mitigate. So not only do they look at the animals, the wildlife here as well, but they also look at the habitat around and make suggestions and recommendations for how you can further mitigate the wildlife attractants as well. Plus, depending on which route you go, they also there's training involved for your staff as well to take care of the wildlife in whatever form or fashion that may be deemed appropriate and legal.
John, we've had problems with coyotes in the past. Have we had any, are they going to look for coyotes or any kind of wildlife?
They're going to look for any kind of wildlife.
Have we had any coyote incidents lately?
I wouldn't. We have had coyotes that have wandered onto the airport, especially during the day, but
yeah, definitely
not human wildlife interaction incidents.
Now, have you guys kept track of how many ravens? I haven't seen that many ravens around here lately.
At my house.
They're in your county.
So I'll tell you, every year.
I'm willing to do a wildlife assessment for you.
So every year since 2016, our depredation permit has increased. In 2016, it was 175. Last year, it was 250. And now for the reauthorization, we've stepped it up to 350. Primarily, it's the ravens. We've managed to arrest some of the starling population that's on the airport. It's still a problem. They're persistent. They're not going away. They're not migratory, like which was first thought. But it's the ravens now that are causing the most damage.
Part of the problem, and this has been brought up before, it's been, I put it in the newspaper and several others, it's dumpsters downtown. Mm-hmm. You can go by there some mornings and they're all, because people don't close the damn dumpsters. Pull out or something like that. That's, you kill somebody.
John, I think it said in the report, but how would they include the dump as part of their study?
Yes, sir. They would include the dump as part of their study. I don't know if they would actually access the dump or just investigate, outside the dump as part of their.
Well, my thinking is, I know at one time in the past, the county, and Bill, you may recall, either wanted to expand the dump or build a new one.
The county didn't want to, somebody else wanted them to expand it. Yeah, there was a plan to do that.
And this might be a tool for a defense if something like that should come up, so.
Well, if they're going to move it, that means people just have to drive further to some side.
What kind of recommendations do they make in these reports? I've never seen one of these reports. I mean, off the cuff, it sounds like to me a federal law to keep biologists fully employed.
Well, it's also to keep people from crashing airplanes.
Well, I understand that. My question is to him.
So what kind of recommendations do they make? So they make recommendations on habitat, on how to mitigate the habitat that brings in certain animals.
When we say mitigate the habitat, what does that mean?
So if we have certain grasses or we have certain bare spots and they recommend, hey, plant these grasses. Or if you have certain trees that are in the area, that tend to bring in the birds. They say, hey, we recommend you either remove these trees, plant different trees, things of that nature. So it's all about the feeding and the nesting that certain plants and I was going to say flora and fauna provide to the animals itself. Plus, they also recommend, well, if you've got them here, how do you mitigate them? Can you trap them? Can you depredate them? And if you're going to do these things, then what are the proper procedures for doing the trapping and the depredation? Along with that, then really that's the gist of what they're going to provide you, as well as the training that goes into how to spot attractants, how to depredate, how to do it safely, and when it becomes a problem, how to notice when things are becoming a problem.
What kind of Pandora's box does this open up for us when they come back with all these recommendations and then we have to start complying to all of them because now we know about them?
Right. So you don't have to respond to every single recommendation. What kind of Pandora's box could this potentially open? Well, just like any USDA wildlife biologist has a report that goes on, if they find a particular species of animal that's I would say endangered or critical list or something like that, there's always that threat. I personally don't know what lives out here. You can guess things like desert tortoise or something like that, but there's always that habit. So what happens if they find something? Then it either goes to you can't work here, you can't dig here, or you have to set aside a certain amount of the land as a protected area while that animal transits in and out of the area, or in perpetuity if it's a habitat. So.
Well, also, if you take the recommendations to get rid of the things that are attracting them in, I would seem to me like as long as you maintain that, that's going to reduce the problem. That's the aim.
It seems like to me that if we do one of these reports, I think that if we engage a biologist to prepare one of these reports to the tune of $83,000, and there are recommendations as to mitigation, that it would be incumbent upon us to take all the remedial action that's recommended. So then that becomes, what does that cost as well?
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah,
What
exactly.
we opening
The
ourselves
Pandora's
to.
box, I'm thinking of it, look, what if we do something, this is directed to council. What if there's an item on the recommendation that we don't undertake to mitigate risk to operators on the airport, and there's an unfortunate incident with some sort of wildlife, and it comes back, well, we didn't take the mitigation recommendation, we didn't do anything about it, then is there some sort of legal liability on our part at that point?
Well,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
there's always risk, and if bird strikes always occur, right? So any airports around the country you go to, JFK, LaGuardia, LAX, whatever, they're always doing, I don't know if you want to say depredation, bird control, right? So you always have that risk. Probably the greater risk is if, like with the dumpsters, you've got open dumpsters around the airport that are it's an attractive nuisance for the birds or coyotes or wildlife or whatever it might be. That's probably more an issue than their recommendations, because they are advisory recommendations. They're not mandates from the biologist. So,
But they could be held against us in an instant if something were to happen and we didn't mitigate after we were recommended to mitigate.
sure. So you have knowledge that this issue exists, right? That you guys can't control the flight of every bird in the area,
And there's,
right?
there's
So,
nothing right now requiring us to get this study.
not to my knowledge.
At this particular moment in time, no. But if you look, if you kind of look out into the future and the questions that the FAA is asking, especially the commercial space transportation side of the FAA, if you look at those questions that they're asking, then you can see that the trend is going towards ensuring that there is a wildlife hazard mitigation plan. You can only get that by addressing the wildlife hazard assessment. Additionally, if there's a trend, even though it's not required at general aviation airports, if you can see a trend of bird strikes, and I'm not saying we have a trend at all by any means, but if you do develop that trend of bird strikes, then you are required to get a wildlife hazard assessment and a management plan. So while it's not required for a general aviation airport, It's not required as long as you're not showing a trend. So this part is perhaps a chance to get out in front of something that may be a requirement for spaceports in the future. It may not be, but it may be. And it's a 12 to 13 month process of surveys, and then another couple months for the management plan to come into play as well. So if they make it a requirement, then we're behind the curve.
I guess my ultimate question, what I would base my decision on, would be, is this something that clearly and presently is a threat to any of our customers on this airport completing their contractual obligations of their projects?
So I'll tell you, the last safety meeting that was held at NTPS, where NTPS offers this basically one of their classrooms to go through an R2508 complex briefing. And it's an opportunity for all the pilots of the various companies to come in, for Joshua to come in and talk about hazards, risk to what's going on in the complex, anything like that. And because I was actually at that meeting physically, I was asked point blank by one of the pilots there, what is the airport doing to control the bird population? And I went through some of the things that we've physically done, that we've removed the oleanders, we removed the dip pond, and I mentioned that we were considering going through this assessment and adopting a plan, and the pilots in that room seemed very pleased to hear that we were going through that process proactively before it really becomes a problem. I don't know that there's been any reported bird strikes lately, so I was kind of surprised to get that question in that
When's the last time we had a reported bird strike at the airport?
So in 2016, we had two reported, I'm sorry, I have the
Information right here. In 2016, we had 2 reported bird strikes. 2016, correction, 4 reported bird strikes.
2017, we had 1. Now, I say reported because the difference is somebody comes to me and says, hey, we may have had a bird strike. Well, if we don't find a body or there isn't any damage to the aircraft, then I can't file a bird strike. It's a suspected bird strike. Who knows? Additionally, we find a bird on the aircraft, not reported by. I'm sorry, a bird on the runway, not reported by an aircraft or a pilot. Then we can suspect a bird strike, but we're not 100% sure. So when I say reported bird strikes, somebody's gone into the database and actually reported it. If nobody does that, then we could have a couple.
And that's all we know. We don't know to the extent of the damage to their aircraft or the incidents.
Correct.
Or what's happened surrounding the incident.
Correct.
So another quick point is, we had another, one of our other customers that did another safety briefing, and they operate in multiple locations throughout Southern California. And this was actually one of the main topics of the conversation was the threat of bird strikes at the various locations they operate from. And they identify Mojave as being a low-risk area for bird strikes. So in my mind, that's a real selling point for Mojave, but we can't prove it. I can't really go on the road and say, set up your business in Mojave because we have low bird population, whereas in Los Angeles area you have a much.
Well, somewhere there's a database because Mr. Himes extracted the information.
Right.
So we could extract that information from somewhere.
Right.
Being a former mitigation dispatcher, in my office at home, I've got the scanner in the background and listened to it for 30, 40 years. And from time to time, I hear the tower operators telling people, do they record those incidents?
Yeah, everything that's over the tower radio is recorded for 30 days.
Yeah, but I mean, do they have a little sheet that they mark out, we saw birds at such and such a day?
I don't think it's
I don't
documented.
know if they physically write it down.
Yeah, that might be one way to track it.
So my point with bringing that up is if it's essentially on file with the FAA, if we go through the process that the FAA approves, I think it's just one additional selling point for Mojave. We promote the remote area, the restricted airspace, the infrastructure, the dry climate. That's just one more thing we can kind of throw into the mix. And you're right, we have that information based on bird strikes, but it doesn't really, it's not really all encompassing because we're not talking about operations, or number of customers, or number of airplanes that are operating from here.
So let's say we spend $83,000 on this report, and then we spend an equal amount in mitigation. So we spend $166,000. How and where are we going to recoup that investment?
So in terms of the hazard mitigation implementation, whatever it is we are required to do, if that's the case, there's actually grant money on the table within the state for anything that's deemed a hazard, but until it's identified a hazard, we can't apply for it. So I think a lot of these things potentially could apply.
So there's some potential reimbursement
Right.
for this from,
I don't know about reimbursement for this study, but.
but for the remedial actions.
Correct.
I've flown a lot of years. I've had one bird strike here, Mojave, California City. I hit what I thought was a hummingbird. Poor little thing. Most of my experiences with near misses with birds have been at coastal airports, not inland airports. That's just my experience.
Phil Cashman and I were flying his Comanche over Cajon Pass one time in Congo. We got low altitude.
Rick probably remembers going through the Spaceship One days when desert tortoise was a hot topic within the FAA, and they almost didn't get their launch license because of that.
We had to sweep it
Yeah.
before each flight.
Did I
We
ask
got a
for-
bird strike
Did I
on
ask for any
L-30
public
line
comment
last
on
year.
this? If I didn't, I am now. Are there any further questions of staff? Is there a budget? I mean, is there a budget? Is there a motion?
I'll make the
I'm
motion.
reading budgeted dollars while I'm talking.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Okay, motion approved by Mr. Valentine,
Second.
second by Mr. Deaver. All in favor say aye. Any opposed?
All opposed.
Motion passes.
And what was your vote?
Wasn't a tie.
Gotta put it down, 4-1 or 3-2.
3-2.
Okay.
If you're gonna press
I
me,
hope you guys don't find any birds in these.
Well, I think it makes a statement about this board, that we're proactive in trying to
it's a borderline
protect
for
our
me.
customers' investments.
Yeah.
And we're taking action to assess if there is a problem. I'm not too worried about the mitigation part of it. I don't think we really have a big problem, and if there's, funds to help with that, that would be great.
I could be swayed either way. I can support that it's passed.
I want to send a message that we're out here to protect your investment.
Amen.
All right, very good. Well, thank you very much. Item 4G.
So this hopefully won't be a surprise either. So we want to start this process, maybe slowly, increasing our rates. And what we're doing at this point, we're going through an exercise of identifying different types of buildings. What buildings are used for? They're either storage buildings, they're manufacturing buildings, which is basically a storage building with water and a bathroom. Either flight line hangars or T hangars. And that's pretty much it for our buildings, is how we're identifying them. So our floor, technically, is 35 cents a square foot. We've got some customers that are paying well below that because they've just been established customers for a really long time. So the first thing we need to do is bring those up to current. So what we're requesting for this particular meeting is officially declaring storage buildings, the rate is 35 cents a square foot. We approved, what we intend to do is send out notices to all the customers that are renting buildings we consider storage, that as of January 1st, 2019, the rate will go up to 35 cents, but then also request that beginning 2020, the rate goes up to 50 cents. Just to give you an idea, the standard roll-up storage units in the area are anywhere from 75 cents to $1. So this is still well below market for storage. We've got a lot of folks that are renting storage facilities here who live in Los Angeles because it's just very affordable. So that's our request. This would be, a storage building would be identified as essentially a building with minimal or no power, with no water, no sewer. So that includes all the bunkers that are up in the north side of the property as well.
Any questions of staff? Any public comment? So the recommended action is to approve the bullet pointed items underneath the background, those three, right?
Correct.
Is there any thought about taking these buildings that don't have power or water and upgrading them?
Right, so that's an exercise I'm going to go through with Floyd. For some of these buildings that are much larger, we have one right now, just as an example, it's probably 6,000 square feet, does not have any water or sewer to it. So we're going through the process of considering what it would take to upgrade that building so it could be used as more of a manufacturing center. So it really is going to depend on the size of the building and the feasibility of getting water and sewer.
I'm sure feasibility is.
All right, I have a motion by Mr. Allred to approve the recommended action.
Second.
Second by Mr. Deaver. If there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, being none, motion passes. Counselor, unanimous. CEO report, please.
Excellent. We've got 2 items for discussion. The operations policy, which is enclosed here in your packet. This is actually the last policy to be adopted to finalize the admin code. However, we'll be bringing back the airport uses policy in September because some of the data that was in the operations policy is better suited for the airport uses, so we're going to bring that one back for consideration as well. It's in your packet here under discussion items only, if there's anything you'd like to discuss or just spend a little time going through it, and then we'll bring it back next week.
I have a minor comment, the thing about people not being allowed to sleep in hangars. This came up back in the Savage days, and we had a couple who were, in fact, I took glider lessons from him, and Jimmy was towing, and I managed to break the tow rope and live to survive and tell you about it. But at that time, the word was that nobody could live in hangars except for hall ambulance. So there is an existing, I just don't know whether you want to put that in the operations plan or not.
Do you have an opinion about that for emergency services? Because Mercy Air is going to fall under that too.
Yeah, Mercy Air also.
Yeah, we'll take that as an action to,
We'll just put it in there.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
And as a matter of fact, I think it is in there.
Probably.
Unless specified otherwise in the lease, there is nobody to live in.
So if somebody squawks, you can just tell them, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bill.
That
Thanks.
looks like a good
Okay.
I have no further comments on it myself either.
Oh, the complex control board. So John and I attended that meeting today, which was successful. It's an opportunity for us to update them on what's going on in Mojave, some of the operations going on today, some of the things that are coming up.
It also stands for Cal City Boulevard.
So the other item for discussion is what we'd like to do is we'd like to keep bringing these rate restructuring recommendations back to the board. So the other one that we would like to consider, which I think this should be a relatively easy one, is anything that we would consider office space, we're moving that up to 75 cents starting next year and then $1.20, which is, again, still well below market, but it gets us going with the rate restructuring process. Just to give you an example, Building 1, which is this building right here. Yeah, so that's pretty much the office part. We rent that out for 50 cents a square foot, and it's full service. So we clean the bathrooms, we pay for all the power, we pay for the gas. The only thing they're paying for is phone and internet. And in summer months, we are lucky if we break even at 50 cents.
Is it rented out or is there
Yep.
vacant?
It's full.
You know, that's probably we've probably got the only office space on this airport, in this town.
Yeah.
What about these offices down here? Do they rent out?
So from what I've researched, most of the real estate in town is at least $1 a square foot. That's the minimum.
Yeah, but do we have vacancies in this?
Oh, back here,
Through that
no.
door?
So we don't lease these offices anymore, other than Shaw Moses, I guess. Shaw Moses is a long-term lease there. But we just use it as temporary office space when we have customers come through
Yeah,
for a couple
that's
months
a
at
good
a time.
idea.
Yeah.
Right. Good.
Any comments on that? Okay, so we'll plan on bringing that back. That's all I have for discussion items.
Thank you. We have no board committees. Are there any direct comments? If not, I have one.
Go ahead. I just had a comment, and I'm sure it's going to be addressed. The entrance on Bellshot is pitch black dark at night. You wouldn't know the street you're coming down onto the airport. I know we took out a light there or something because of our sign, but it should be addressed because if you're coming onto the airport after dark, you don't know where you're going.
Yeah, that's not the safest. It's better now with the lower bushes, but it's.
Yeah, it should
So,
be.
yeah, that's a good point. So we installed those solar streetlights on Airport Boulevard. We're gonna do another round of solar lights. They're, almost $5 grand a pop, but it solves the problem and Edison, it's really hard to get Edison to install more lights out here. Maybe what we ought to do, so what I've talked to Jason about is getting one down in the T-hangar area, a permanent light at the bathrooms at least, because again, that area is pitch black.
Well, the whole area should be. That's all right.
Right, so let's focus on the entrance area too, Jason, for those lights. Good idea.
Any other direct comments? I decided not to make a comment, so we're gonna move right on. All right, any public comment? All right, we move to closed session. Thank you very much.